Hello, and welcome to the Java Libraries course for Cup of Java. My name is Andrew, and Angelina and I will be taking you through this lesson, which is an introduction to JavaFX, the main Java library we will be using for this course. So, what is JavaFX? JavaFX is an application builder and GUI, which stands for Graphical User Interface, library for Java. Java itself doesn't really support windowed graphics, so external graphics libraries like these are needed for more complicated applications. It was originally developed by Sun Microsystems, who are the creators of Java. They were later bought out by Oracle, which is why most Java things are under that name nowadays. It's open source, meaning that the code is available for people to change and make modifications, as well as see how it works behind the scenes. It's old and still supported, so it's a very vibrant and active community of people creating their own libraries, applications, and engines to help people extend what's possible with JavaFX. It's a successor to other official Java graphics libraries. These include AWT and Java Swing. Java Swing contained more implementation and support for backwards compatibility with AWT than JavaFX does for Swing and AWT. So it's a more limited successor and not really as direct as Swing and AWT. So before we move on to JavaFX, let's look at its predecessors. So AWT was released alongside Java in 1995, and these AWT widgets, or Abstract Window Toolkit widgets, were the original windowed graphics for Java. However, while Java is write once, run anywhere, AWT was platform dependent and not entirely written in Java. This was a big downside, as Java's universality, as long as there was a Java virtual machine, was one of its big strengths. So AWT has a big hindrance by having to have different implementations based on different machines, which made it much harder to use and much harder to make good applications. AWT interfaces with the computer for window graphic through an API. So although AWT is outdated and not used nowadays, this API is still the basis and backbone for most Java graphics packages. So AWT can be kind of seen as the grandfather of all modern Java graphics libraries. AWT came with many of the standard features for Java graphics libraries, such as layouts, event handling, and input devices. It also came with many pre-made things, such as buttons, labels, checkboxes, and other stuff, that make creating applications easier and created kind of a standard look for AWT and other Java graphics library elements. So Swing is the successor to AWT. However, it was not developed by Sun Microsystems, but instead developed by Netscape. And Netscape developed it as Internet Foundation classes as its own standalone GUI library for Java. It was originally released in 1996, only a year after Java released. Netscape and Sun Microsystems teamed up the following year and announced Java Foundation classes, which incorporated Internet Foundation classes into the main Java package. This, however, was renamed to Java Swing later, so that's what it's known as nowadays. Unlike AWT, the code is entirely written in Java. That means it only has to go through the Java virtual machine, meaning like Java, it's platform independent, making it much easier to use and make universal applications for. This pretty much instantly make it outperform and make AWT obsolete, so Swing is seen as a direct successor to AWT. Now let's move on to a brief history of JavaFX itself. The original concept was worked on by a programmer named Chris Oliver, and he called it F3. From what we know of F3 now through his blogs and other things, it had many of the concepts that would later be introduced in JavaFX. However, the syntax and other parts were much different, and it was much more primitive than what would eventually be known as JavaFX. Despite starting work in 2005, it was announced by Sun Microsystems in May of 2007. The first public build, which is build 1.0.2, was released a bit over a year later, in December of 2008. Subsequent major updates, denoted by an increase of the second number, were named after places in San Francisco. For example, in version 1.1, which added mobile support along with many other things, was named Franca. The version we will be using for this video is JavaFX version 19. It was released in September of 2022, which is actually the recording month for this video. Version 20 is already planned for March of 2023, but is not out yet, so version 19 will be used for this video. Alright, so let's start with setting up JavaFX for desktop. So what you want to do first is go to the JavaFX website, which is openjfx.io. So as you can see, it's a very nice website, and so it has many different parts. So you have the download part, which we'll get to in the second, but it also has documentation. So it has the own internal documentation here, which has many different wordy and very specific and technical explanations for all the different things you can do in JavaFX. It's a great resource to knowing what you can do, but it is hard to use and not really good for beginners. It also has community documentation here, which is probably a bit more beginner friendly and a bit more tuned to what you'll need to start JavaFX, as this is made more tutorials by the community. So both are very good resources that you want to check out if you want to learn more about JavaFX. It also has a community tab, which shows off many of the libraries and applications created by the JavaFX community over the years. So as you can see, they're very useful if you want to create more complicated applications than what's offered in vanilla JavaFX. So if you want to make something big or specific, it's best to look here. So let's go back up to the download page and click on the download button, which will take us to an external website. And this has all the releases for the recent JavaFX stuff. So as you can see, we have all the way back to 11, which was 4 years ago now, and 20 is planned for a few months. So 19 is the current version. So we can scroll down and look at this giant wall of download options. So don't fear, we only really care about two of these. That is the Windows SDK 64, which most modern Windows machines will need. However, if you have a particularly old Windows machine, you want to get the SDK x86 version, which is equivalent to the 32-bit version. For Mac, same idea applies. Most modern things you'll want the SDK for 64. All these other things are not really versions we care about for this. So you want to click the download button for either this one, that one, or this one, whichever one your computer uses. And you want to extract it. So it'll download this as a zip file. So you want to extract the zip file and put it in a place you remember. It doesn't necessarily need to be with all your Java stuff. It just has to be a place where you'll know to look for it later when we come to set it up. So let's configure it for Eclipse, since Eclipse is one of the more popular Java IDEs. So what you want to do first is obviously open Eclipse. So we can open Eclipse, and you see I already have HelloFX open. So we'll just ignore this, we'll open it later, and let's get to setting up JavaFX. So assume you don't have JavaFX set up. What you want to do first is go to Window, Preferences. And you'll see I already have this open, but assuming I didn't, you'll want to click Java, Build Path, and User Libraries. So you can see I already have JavaFX set up, but if I wanted to make it, all I do is click New, type in whatever, JavaFX 19, click OK, and then click on it and add external jars. This will take you to a file explorer, and what you can do there is go to where you put your JavaFX code and open up the library folder, or lib. And in there you'll see a bunch of jars, should roughly match these names, and you want to select all of them and click OK. This will add all the jars you need to your custom user library, and you can just click Apply and Close to save. So now what you'll want to do is create a new Java project. It doesn't have to be anything special, but you should probably name it something like HelloFX or TestFX or MyFirstFX or something like that. And you want to set it up like a normal Java project in Eclipse. So in order to add JavaFX, let's go back to Eclipse. You want to right click, go to Build Path, go to Add Libraries, and click on User Libraries. This will take you to all the user libraries you have, and if you're really only doing this for the first time, you'll just have JavaFX. You want to click on it, click Finish, although you can see we already have it, and so it should add it like this. You see we already have the base Java library, and now we have JavaFX. So in order to get started, as there's quite a bit of code you'll need to start, you want to go to this link, which has some starter code for JavaFX. So you can see you have 3 different files it wants you to include, and so you'll want to either download the files and put them in your project, or just click on them, copy the code, and paste it elsewhere. So you can see I already have that set up with main.java, controller.java, and hello.fxml. You don't really need to worry about what the code in these, as we'll get to that later. But you can see some basic patterns like setting title, showing, stages, all that, and we'll get to that later. So you can see I also have this module info.java file. And so this may or may not be included already in your Eclipse project. If not, I can just delete it to show you what will happen. Nothing will happen immediately, but if you try to run it, you'll see we can't find JavaFX. So what you want to do, if that's the case, is right click, go down to configure, and do create module info.java, click create, and wait for it to load. Sorry about that. And here we go, we have it back. So it accrued all the things automatically. In my experience when trying to set this up, when I added files after creating module info.java, I got many errors on the JavaFX part of these require statements and export and all that. And so all I did was I deleted module info.java and re-added it. And I guess it added more of these require statements because it just worked. So just keep that in mind when trying to set this up on your own. Oh yeah, and don't forget to change the package statements at the top to whatever you named your project. And so, as you can see, if you get one of those two errors, the bottom one is the one the website talked about, but the top one is the one I kept getting, you'll want to create module info.java. And if any massive errors are relating to JavaFX, you might want to try deleting and re-adding module info.java, as that worked for me many times when I thought it wouldn't. So overall, your program should look like this. It should be an empty screen, and it should just say Hello World as the title. So that's all we have for now. This is our Hello World project. So you can see we can resize it, and JavaFX doesn't really like that, so we'll probably get to fixing that eventually. But if we go back to here, my bad, we can see that now if you want to set it up on Replit, where you don't have to worry about all this hassle, Replit will just do it for you. So you can go and create a template, not Java as you're probably used to, but JavaFX, and you'll see it develop all this template code. And it'll develop a much more complicated scene than the Hello World one we took a while to develop earlier. You can see it's already has a predefined size, and it has text, a text field, which is just a text box you can type in, and a button that says click. And so what this will do is you type in the text field and click click, and the text at the top will be replaced with the text field. So this has a lot more components to it, but as of now, we don't really need to worry about that, and we'll get to that later. You can see different things, such as creating a new button with text and all that. So it should be pretty self-explanatory, but we'll go into how all this works in later lessons and later down the road.
So I'm going to be talking about the JavaFX structure, and so basically, like, that's how we create the coding, and then so it's very important to understand how the structure works as you're like. So this is a window, so you know where to start coding and where to end. So the structure is basically the window of the portion. It's called the stage, and it's created at runtime, and it contains every other part of JavaFX, including just the whole code of it. And it's an object, which is a Java term. So if you don't know what an object is, it's basically just it's similar to a variable, except it has much more like data and information within it, and it can be used to create more objects, and it can be used in the interaction with an object is so much more than just a normal variable. And of course, there can be multiple stages created if need be, which essentially is opening a new tab in your window at runtime, which your code can do. So the next part of it is a scene, which basically goes in like this portion of it that I've labeled right here, and only one scene can be displayed at each time. However, one stage can have multiple scenes stored inside the stage. So start thinking like theater, and there's like multiple scenes, and that can be transported, and it's something connected by nodes, which I will get to in the next slide on what nodes are, how they work, and why they're important. And multiple scenes in one stage is necessary for applications such as like games. So like for example, there's like the menu screen, the settings screen, the gameplay screen, like the game over screen, and like such and so on. And then so the scene is also important because it contains everything else that's in it. So it's just like it has multiple layers, JavaFX, if that makes sense. So the first layer, the top layer, is just the stage, and it's a scene, and then it's the layout, which is essentially like the components of a scene, and it has like multiple components in one layout, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It's just how things look like on the website and how it works. And then and it must be attached to like the scene in a scene graph. And a scene graph is essentially just the graph of all the nodes as like this picture shows right here, and it's like within the scene. So all the nodes connect to each other and to the next node after it. And the scene graph is just like is just a graph of the visual components attached to the scene. So this is what nodes are. It's a type of data structure, so it's similar in a list that in that it can be like linear. However, it often is not. So there's usually one node, and it can connect to multiple other nodes through like either user input or just usually user input. And so it can like if you press a button, it goes into this node. If you type something, it goes into this node. If you don't, it types into this node, which connects to like multiple other nodes. And it can only access information that to the nodes that are next to it. That's important to remember. So a leaf node, so like for example, this node right here in the middle, it can only access information from the top node. And since it doesn't connect to any other node like afterwards, it can only access information from its parent node. And the and this is contrary to like a branch node, which points to more than one node and can like access multiple information. However, the bottom leaf node right here can never access information from the root node immediately. It has to go through the branch node and then it goes to the root node. So if you think about it in terms of website design, it'd be similar to something such as like you open a tab and then you search something up and then you go into like a long line of like websites, like you dive into a hole, but from that website you can no longer access the home screen until you just keep pressing like back. That's a way to think about nodes that might make more sense. And essentially the root node is just like the home screen. It's the one that opens when you first run your code with like the start method. And then controls is part of the layout. So essentially controls a screen, and it's just user input focused. That's just the only point of it basically. So examples are like buttons, checkboxes, text boxes, and so these controls would control the nodes, and that would control like the way the users is shown these scenes essentially. So like for example, with this example right here, if you type in your password and email and then you press submit, that control would lead you to a different node, which is like your another screen, which is another scene essentially. So this is basically the basics of JavaFX structure and how it works and how they're all interconnected. And the important part is just nodes. Thank you.